Ugh, got another round of man flu. Oh, I think it's terminal this time. It always is, isn't it? Let's be honest. If you're a guy, you will know what I mean. So today I'm actually doing my first ever, I think it's my first ever color grading tutorial. I'm no professional, I'm still learning, but I'm pretty happy with the kind of colors I get. So I wanted to pass that information for myself over to you guys. So today we're going to be looking at color grading some Mavic Air 2 footage. One shot is from the Lake District where I visited last year, and the second is from a video which I shot just a couple of weeks ago about the Mavic Air 2. For this tutorial I'm using Adobe Premiere Pro, but if you're using Final Cut or DaVinci Resolve or anything else other than Premiere Pro, you can still follow along. A lot of the controls are the same. They may just have different names. I'm not 100%, I only use Premiere Pro. So both of these bits of footage were shot in 25 frames a second 4K and shot in the Cine D-like pitch profile inside the Mavic Air 2. I'd always recommend shooting in the flattest profile possible, regardless of what camera you're using, but just be aware that if you're using 8-bit footage like you get from the Mavic Air 2, sometimes stretching it out and making it contrasty and saturated and color grading it can be slightly difficult because you don't have as much information to work with, unlike if you were shooting in RAW or 10-bit or whatever else. But we're not here to talk about dynamic range or how to set up a drone. That's for another video. So when it comes to color grading, there's actually two steps to color grading. The first one being color correction, where you get the image to look as close to natural as possible. And the second part is actually the grade, which is the creative look to give it the kind of vibe you want for your footage. Normally I swear by using a conversion look to correct your footage from whatever pitch profile you're using over to like the Rec 709 vibe. But when it comes to the Cine D-like pitch profile, which DJI have on all their drones, I've never actually found anything quite as accurate as what I'd like. So let's make a start on the first clip, which is the one from the Lake District. We're going to be using the scopes for this, so if you don't have that already in Premiere Pro, come up to Window and then go down to Lumetri scopes. And we're going to be using a luminal waveform and also a vector scope. Now I actually only use these as a guide. I actually use my eyes more than anything. This is really good when it comes to color matching one shot to the next. I know someone's probably watching this and thinking, what are you on about? You should always use scopes because your display may not be calibrated properly, but I just, it's the way I work, and it's worked for me for the last 4 years, so I'm sticking with what I know. So first up, I want to make sure my exposure is correct because that's going to affect everything else that I do later on. Now I may change this and come back to this later on down the line. So for this shot, I'm quite happy with the exposure, but I want to add more contrast to it because at the minute it's sat around the middle of the waveform and I want to stretch it out. So I'm going to get the black slider and bring that down till it touches almost black, because down here in the right hand side it was actually quite dark because obviously that's the shadow. And I actually don't mind crushing the blacks a little bit when it comes to DJI footage because sometimes it can get really noisy, and if you crush it then you can actually get rid of some of the noise. Then I want to come down to the shadows and bring that down to add that last little bit of contrast in, and you can see not only does it bring the shadows down, but it actually adds a little bit of saturation to it, because as you add contrast to any image, the saturation does actually go up ever so slightly. Then I want to increase the brightness of the details in the image, so I'm going to bring the highlights up ever so slightly, being careful not to clip any of the whites in the image. And as you can see, it's just below the 100, so I don't need to worry about any clipping at this moment in time. Then I'm going to stretch down the shadows just ever so slightly more, and the final step I always do is just to add that little bit of saturation, just a little bit, like 118.4, something like 120, just that little bit extra, because if you want to add any kind of LUT after or any particular grade, I feel like it sticks a little bit better to the footage and it gives you something nicer to work with. So in terms of correction, you've got the before and then you've got the after, and already you can see that it's looking a lot more nicer to be able to put in one of your videos. So when it comes to color correction and color grading, I like to put everything on different layers, especially if you want to put a lot of clips together, because you want to keep the grade the same across multiple clips. The easiest way to do that is to have an adjustment layer. So you want to make an adjustment layer and then drag that over your footage and then stretch it out across all the clips you want to apply that LUT or the creative look to. At this point, it is completely down to you what you want to do. If you want to change the greens, if you want to change the blues, you can, and that's the part of the creative grade process. So for this shot, I want to create a look where you alter the greens ever so slightly. I like them to be quite desaturated, but still very airy. So to do that, you want to come into the curves and then come down to the hue versus sat, hue versus hue, and then humor versus luma. Now it doesn't matter which order you do these in. I'm going to start with saturation because that's where I like to go to begin with. I'm actually going to color pick the greens, so I'm only affecting the specific greens in the image. And you'll notice when I do that, on the curve you get 3 points and you want to adjust the middle one. Now because we're using 8-bit footage, I actually want to make them points a little bit wider so it isn't as obvious. And to be fair, even if this was 10-bit or raw footage, I would still probably do that to make it look a little more natural. So all you need to do is drag them points out, only go a little bit further than what they are on both sides. And then I can get the middle point and then drag that down ever so slightly to desaturate it. So I'm also going to affect the luminance of the greens, but because I already know what points I need to affect, then I can just make them points on the curve and then grab the middle point and then drag that up. And already with them two simple changes in the curves, you've got the before and you've got the after. So I've also made an adjustment to the blues in the sky just to add a little bit of saturation, but also bring the brightness down ever so slightly to add a little bit of color contrast against the clouds. Next, we can come down to the color wheels and we can affect the shadows, the midtones and the highlights and add a slight tint to all of them and adjust them really nicely. So something I really like to do is add a really nice dark blue to all of my shadows. To do that, you just need to come into the shadows and then drag that down to the dark blues. As you can see, especially down in the bottom right corner where the shadows are, you are getting that nice dark blue coming into the water. You can also drag down this point on the left hand side just to add a little more contrast to the shadows. And the white balance of an image is controlled by the midtones. And because it was a hot summer's day, I want to add that warmth back to the image. So I'm going to grab the midtones and just drag it ever so slightly over to the oranges. So after just them two simple changes in the curves and the color wheels, you've now got the before and after. And I'm really happy with how it looks, apart from one slight thing, and that is the weird orangey color that we're getting in the water, and that's because of the reflections of the mountains off in the distance, and we need to kind of pull that back. Now what you may do is go into the curves and color pick that part of their image and then pull the saturation down or try and change the hue of that. But because you already have that color somewhere else in the image, you are starting to affect the whole image. And any of these adjustments you won't want to put onto the adjustment layer because you only want to affect this particular shot. So we need to go back to the original region where the footage is. Now what you can do in Premiere Pro is add another Lumetri color. So we're going to come up to the top right hand side and just click on add Lumetri color effect. Now you need to stick with me for this bit because you'll see why I'm doing it in just a second. But you want to come to the curves, you want to come down to the color picker for hue versus sat, and then color pick that part of the image. And you'll see that the 3 points show up again. Like before, just make them a little bit wider, and then you want to start pulling that color out so you can't see it anymore in the water, like that. Now obviously that's affected the whole image because that was before and that's after. As you can see, that color is in a lot of the image and we only want to affect a certain part. So what we're going to use is a mask. So you want to come up to effects controls and then come down to that Lumetri color, and then you want to grab the pen tool, and what we're going to do is draw around where the water is. And then we're just going to add ever so slight feather into that just to make it blend really nicely. So now you got that nice dark blue water, but if you was to get rid of that Lumetri color, then it goes back to that horrible, ugly, terrible like color cast over the water. And what you could also do is come into the color wheels and grab the midtones and just drag them ever so subtly into the blues. You don't want to go too far or it starts to look a little bit weird. Now because you've applied a grade to an adjustment layer which is over the second clip, your third clip and fourth clip, you can then go to the next clip along in your sequence and then start color matching it to the first clip. A good way to do that is by using the comparison view because that will show you a clip from anywhere else in the sequence, and then you can use that side by side as an A and B. So I'm just going to fly through this really quickly just so you can see what I'm doing. So I don't want to keep people waiting any longer. But we're going to be using the Lumetri scopes to try and color match it as much as possible. As you can see, anything which was around that kind of darkness, I'm dragging it down, and the same if it's brighter, then I'm dragging it up so it's a lot brighter. And there you have two clips which have been color corrected and color graded from the DJI Mavic Air 2. Now, in this second clip, what you can do is start adding more adjustments over the top of that, the same way as we did with the water from the first shot. Now, what you may want to do is add a gradient filter down the left-hand side of the image to kind of draw the viewer's eye into the building in the middle. For anything like that, I actually add it to an adjustment layer on top of the look and not to the actual clip or adjustment layer containing the grade over the top. We're gonna make sure the adjustment layer which is contained in this gradient filter is selected. Come up to effects controls and choose the pen tool. We're just gonna draw the section where I want to add that gradient filter, like that, and then stretch it out a little bit further. And what we want to do is add a large amount of feather so it isn't as obvious to the viewer. Somewhere around there should do it. And then just drag it down in the exposure ever so slightly. You don't want to go too obscene because then you make it a little bit obvious, but it allows you to kind of control the way the viewer sees the image. Now obviously that step isn't necessary, but it's really nice to sometimes control the image ever so slightly more. And it may take a little bit longer, but by using mask, you can really enhance that image just a little bit more than you could originally. Obviously it would be really wrong of me to be a YouTuber and do a color grading tutorial without mentioning my own personal LUTs. And I have just launched my own cinematic LUT pack, which you can get down in the description box below if you want to pick that up. Fingers crossed this video has helped you out in terms of color grading. If you've enjoyed the video, then hit the like button, as it allows me to show this video to more people on the platform who may also find it useful. If you want to see more content like this, then hit the subscribe button, and if you do, I will see you right there. Thank you very much for watching.